Hello, my name's Dave Emery, and this is Side 1 of For the Record program number 522, titled The Safari Club, subtitled Fifth Column, Part 6. This is being recorded on August 14th of the year 2005. As the title of the broadcast indicates, this is another program in a series that I've been doing since September 11th, dealing with the development of a fifth column that subverted the American response to September 11th and, in my opinion, continues to subvert this country and ultimately will wind up doing it if it isn't interdicted, and I am not optimistic that that will take place. The reason I am not optimistic is that this fifth column embodies some of the most powerful elements in this country and also is a direct outgrowth of some profound and dominant politico-economic relationships, including and especially the relationships within the petroleum industry that joined the Bush family with the Saudi power elite. This program is going to be based in its entirety, derived really in its entirety from a very important new book about the U.S. intelligence community. It's called Prelude to Terror by Joseph Trento, published in hardcover by Carolyn Graff, copyright 2005 by Joseph Trento, the author of, among other titles, The Secret History of the CIA. This book is going to be dealing with the privatization and really outsourcing of U.S. intelligence in the last several decades. Outsourcing and privatization are key buzzwords, indeed dominant elements of the current political and economic paradigm. The intelligence community is no exception, and indeed, as I indicated, the outgrowth of privatization and outsourcing of intelligence here is a direct result it stems directly from some of the political and economic relationships. The Safari Club is an intelligence milieu put together by a number of nations in the mid-1970s to basically conduct the outsourcing of key U.S. intelligence functions which had previously been relegated to the CIA. The ostensible reason for this was because of the church committees and other congressional investigations into the intelligence community. That was part of it. One thing that's not mentioned in Joseph Trento's book is the House Select Committee on Assassinations investigation of the mid-1970s, which, had it been pursued as vigorously as it might have been, would have literally rocked the intelligence community to its very foundations. That did not take place, but I suspect that the House Select Committee on Assassinations investigation, along with the other lesser investigations like the Church and Rockefeller Church Committee and Rockefeller Commission investigations, were one of the things that helped to precipitate the outsourcing of U.S. intelligence. There were a lot of dirty tricks and nasty secrets to be hid, and in order to keep them hidden, the intelligence work of this country in many ways was outsourced. Among the things that we're going to be looking at, first of all, is the outsourcing of U.S. intelligence on the Middle East to Saudi Arabia, whereas previously, under CIA counterintelligence whiz James Angleton, Israel had been the primary source of intelligence for the U.S. on the Middle East. After the Safari Club kicked in, it became Saudi Arabia. We're going to take a look at a number of elements which figure prominently in the events in and around September 11th. Of paramount significance in the Safari Club are A, the elder George Bush, whose milieu was re-empowered under his son. We're going to be taking a look at Prince Turki, the chief of Saudi intelligence for decades, the man who oversaw, basically the guy who ran Osama bin Laden, both when he was working for the MAK, the Afghan Mujahideen, and subsequently, Prince Turki resigned his position as chief of Saudi intelligence after 20-odd years, just a couple of weeks before September 11th. Prince Turki, by the way, not incidentally, one of the paramount operatives of the Safari Club, is now the Saudi ambassador to the United States. We're going to be taking a look at the development of the BCCI milieu. That milieu figures prominently in the events in and around September 11th, both with regard to the Saudi and Islamist elements involved in September 11th, and with regard to some of the U.S. intelligence and judicial elements that either deliberately subverted or subsequently helped to cover up some of the insidious connections we're going to be talking about here. Again, the BCCI milieu of paramount significance in the September 11th investigations on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. We're going to be taking a look at a cast of characters, although the names won't be mentioned that much here, that we looked at great length, and among other programs, RFA number 4, titled Wilson, Turple and Company. That program's available from Spitfire, and that focused on people like Ed Wilson and Frank Turple, quote, ex-unquote CIA officers whose activities spanned many decades. Some of the key principals in the Wilson Turple milieu, people like CIA counterintelligence primaries, Theodore Shackley and Thomas Kleins, anti-Castro Cuban veterans like Rafael Chichi Quintero, the Villaverde brothers, and others. Again, we've looked at the Wilson Turple milieu in RFA number 4, RFAs 29 and 30, among other broadcasts. And the Shackley-Kleins axis is one of the major focal points of Joseph Trento's book. The book that we're going to be deriving this program from is one of the most important books ever written about the U.S. intelligence community, called Prelude to Terror by Joseph Trento. Again, the author of, among other titles, The Secret History of the CIA. And again, it should be noted that this institution, the Safari Club, a privatized, outsourced U.S. intelligence apparatus, outsourced to Saudi Arabia, privatized to elements like the Saudi and Pakistani intelligence service, privatized to elements that, although they were willing to work with the U.S. in certain capacities, were, in their foundation, fundamentally opposed to the United States. And this paved the way for the creation not only of Al-Qaeda, but for the infiltration of some of these elements into the United States. In the introduction to Joseph Trento's Prelude to Terror, published in hardcover by Carolyn Graff, there is a paragraph that sums up this book. And again, this gets the Dave Emery 5-star rating. Joseph Trento writes in his introduction, Prelude to Terror will focus on how the privatization of intelligence metamorphosed from an instrument of limited application in the 1950s into a broad-based core operating model of significant proportions in the 1970s and 80s. Simultaneously, a secret alliance was forged with Saudi intelligence. This alliance was orchestrated by CIA covert management without the knowledge of Congress and, in some cases, even the President. Ultimately, as these two developments became increasingly intertwined, a dynamic of catastrophic proportions was created, one that left the United States with a severely compromised intelligence apparatus in the Middle East. Now, one should note, as we begin to talk about the privatization of U.S. intelligence and the outsourcing of U.S. intelligence functions, that this outsourcing is directly reflective of and an outgrowth of profound political/economic relationships, in this case deriving largely from the petroleum industry. Bush family involved with the petroleum industry, the Saudis involved with the petroleum industry, and at a deeper level we see elements going to what I call the underground, right? People like Allen Dulles. Dulles helped to invest Bush family money on behalf of Nazi Germany, became director of the CIA, apparently recruited George Bush to the elder George Bush to the CIA in order to, among other things, help to influence Prescott Bush Sr., one of the senators most involved with the covert operations milieu. Allen Dulles was also deeply involved with the founding of Saudi Arabia, along with British intelligence agent and Third Reich double agent Jack Philby. And to this day, the Sullivan and Cromwell law firm, the old Dulles law firm, is the legal counsel for Saudi bin Laden Group. Now, in the 1970s, there were a number of investigations of the U.S. intelligence community going on. The Church Committee investigation, most importantly, the House Select Committee on Assassinations investigation, which, had it been pursued to its ultimate, would have had the most profound effects, not only on U.S. intelligence, but on world history, and also in a much lesser way, the Rockefeller Commission as well. What we're going to look at now is the development of the Safari Club. During George Bush's Zapata offshore years, he'd met most of the Gulf region's royals and had developed close personal relationships with several of them. When Saudi money began flowing into Texas in the 1970s, Bush and his family became very friendly with the most influential Saudis living in the United States. The most important friendship Bush had was with a quiet, dignified man named Sheikh Kamal Adam, director of Saudi intelligence, whom Bush had met through his father. Bush had told reporters, "I never met Kamal Adam personally," unquote. But according to lawyers for the late Saudi intelligence head and several officials at the CIA who served under Bush, there were several official meetings inside and outside the United States, both before and after Bush was the DCI. Quote, "Bush and Kamal were old friends. I was present when they met in New York when Bush was still United Nations ambassador," unquote, Sarkis Sognalian said. By the way, Sognalian, a major arms dealer of Lebanese extraction and someone who has worked hand in glove with the U.S. intelligence apparatus, including and especially in the Iran-Contra and Iraq-Gate affairs, those overseen by the elder Bush and utilizing Safari Club assets. Continuing. Bush and Adam shared a fascination with intelligence. Bush also took a deep interest in the Sheikh's American-educated nephew, His Royal Highness Prince Turki bin Faisal Al Saud. Again, before we continue with discussion of Prince Turki, he was a major player in the Safari Club along with the elder George Bush. He was the Saudi intelligence chief who ran Osama bin Laden for decades. He resigned his position as Saudi intelligence chief a little less than 2 weeks before September 11th. He is now Saudi ambassador to the United States. Continuing. Prince Turki had been a subject of CIA interest ever since his father had sent him to prep school at the Lawrenceville School in New Jersey. Agency talent spotters on the faculty at Georgetown University kept close track of Turki until he dropped out of Georgetown to return home at the outbreak of the 1967 war with Israel. After later completing his education in England, Turki again returned home to prepare himself to eventually succeed his uncle Kamal Adam as director of Saudi intelligence. On his visits here, Robert Crowley recalled, agency management made Turki welcome, knowing full well that at some point Saudi Arabia's General Intelligence Department, or GID, parenthetically the Saudi Intelligence Service, would fall under his control, unquote. As a young Saudi bureaucrat, Prince Turki was cultivated by various CIA operatives including Shackley, Clines, and Turpel. In the early 1970s, when Turpel and Wilson first started operations in Libya, Turpel set Wilson up with a Geneva lawyer named Robert Turretini, who also handled banking matters for Turki. Turpel told Wilson that he went back years with Turki through Turki's personal assistant. When Wilson needed financial backing and for several large-scale operations, Prince Turki put up the cash. In 1992, Wilson said he shared millions of dollars with Turki in a Swiss bank account from an old operation. Parenthetically, these are the operations of Ed Wilson and Frank Turpel. Some of the residua of these operations, some of the Iran-Contra drug smuggling networks figure prominently in the September 11th scenario. For the record, programs 498 and 499, among other broadcasts, go into those. The heroic Daniel Hopsiger has done some superb on-the-ground investigation of how residual elements of these networks figure into the milieu of Mohammed Atta and Company in Florida. Continuing about the development of the Safari Club. Both Prince Turki and Sheikh Kamal Adam would play enormous roles in servicing a spy network designed to replace the official CIA while it was under congressional scrutiny between the time of Watergate and the end of the Carter administration. The idea of using the Saudi royal family to bypass the American Constitution did not originate in the kingdom. Adam was initially approached by one of the most respected and powerful men in Washington, Clark Clifford, who rose to power under Harry Truman and enjoyed a relationship with the intelligence community for years. Quote, Clark Clifford approached Kamal Adam and asked that the Saudis consider setting up an informal intelligence network outside the United States during the investigations, Robert Crowley said. Crowley, in his role as CIA's liaison to the corporate world, was privy to the plan, in which worldwide covert operations for the agency were funded through a host of Saudi banking and charity enterprises. Several top U.S. military and intelligence officials directed the operations from positions they held overseas, notably former CIA Director Richard Helms, at this time ambassador to Iran. More about the development of this network, and note that later on, among the financial institutions that grew out of and played a key part in this network, in addition to BCCI, is the Riggs Bank in Washington, D.C. Former Saudi ambassador to the U.S., Prince Bandar, was a key player in U.S. covert operations through this Safari Club. And note that the Riggs Bank is now under investigation, and the Riggs Bank is a focal point of a number of questions vis-a-vis September 11th. The Riggs Bank, like the BCCI, key elements of the Safari Club, figuring prominently as well in the events in and around September 11th. Continuing. Ed Wilson and his associates supported the Safari Club network. According to Wilson, Prince Turki was used to finance several of his intelligence operations during this time period. According to Wilson, the amounts were in the millions of dollars. According to Tom Clines, the relationship between the Saudis and the private U.S. intelligence network that grew out of the activities of Clines and his colleagues was, quote, vital. These operations were so sensitive they could not be revealed, unquote. Mike Pilgrim, who also played a role in the operations of the private network during the 1980s, said, quote, it got to the point where we were used to support GID operations when the CIA could not, unquote. According to those involved, there was no line drawn between what was official and what became personal business. Prince Turki himself acknowledged the private network for the first time in an uncharacteristically candid speech given to Georgetown University alumni in February of 2002. Quote, and now I will go back to the secret that I promised to tell you. In 1976, after the Watergate matters took place, your intelligence community was literally tied up by Congress. It couldn't do anything. It could not send spies, it could not write reports, and it could not pay money. In order to compensate for that, a group of countries got together in the hope of fighting communism and established what was called the Safari Club. The Safari Club included France, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, and Iran. The principal aim of this club was that we would share information with each other and help each other in countering Soviet influence worldwide, and especially in Africa. In the 1970s, there were still some countries in Africa that were coming out of colonialism, among them Mozambique, Angola, and I think Djibouti. The main concern of everybody was that the spread of communism was taking place while the main country that would oppose communism was tied up. Congress had literally paralyzed the work not only of the U.S. intelligence community but of its foreign service as well. And so the kingdom with these countries helped in some way, I believe, to keep the world safe at the time when the United States was not able to do that. That, I think, is a secret that many of you don't know. I'm not saying it because I look to tell secrets, but because the time has gone and many of the actors are gone as well. Unquote. Parenthetically, this is his view here. Again, Prince Turki, chief of Saudi intelligence, ran Osama bin Laden for decades, resigned his position as Saudi intelligence chief a little less than 2 weeks before September 11th. A lot of this is BS. I mean, the U.S. intelligence community was not paralyzed because of these investigations. Far from it. I suspect had the House Select Committee on Assassinations investigation gone farther than it did, it would have had some profound seismic effects in the world intelligence community, but that did not take place. Do note that the founding of the Safari Club was in its essence fundamentally anti-democratic with a small d. The idea was to bypass legitimate congressional, presidential, and constitutional authority. More about the Saudis, Prince Turki, and the development of the Safari Club. Note here, the Riggs Bank and Prince Bandar's accounts there, key elements of one aspect of the September 11th investigation. Turki's secret was that the Saudi royal family had taken over intelligence financing for the United States. It was during this time period that the Saudis opened up a series of covert accounts at Riggs Bank in Washington. Starting in the mid-1970s, bank investigators say these accounts show that tens of millions of dollars were being transferred between CIA operational accounts and accounts controlled by Saudi companies and the Saudi embassy itself. Turki worked directly with agency operatives like Sarkis Sognalian and Ed Wilson. If I needed money for an operation, Prince Turki made it available, unquote, Wilson said. Clifford's request for Saudi help came at a very critical time for the Saudi royal family. Although the House of Saud had long placated domestic conservative clerics by allowing an educational system that targeted the West, especially the United States, as evil, they were still deathly afraid of the establishment of any Muslim fundamentalist regime in the region. Their interests included keeping the Shah in charge in Tehran and keeping an eye on an increasingly militant Libya. Although normally Israeli and Saudi interests were in conflict, in this case they converged. It was in the interests of Albert Hakim, Frank Turpel's sometime employer, to serve as a bridge between the two. Sarkis Sogneilian was close to Sheikh Kamal Adam during this period. Adam frequently asked Sogneilian, quote, about what kind of shape the Shah was in. He complained the CIA was not giving him the full picture of how the Shah was losing control, unquote. Adam believed that binding Saudi Arabia with the United States would increase the House of Saud's chances of surviving an Islamic resurgence. Believe me, Sogneilian said, Kamal did not do these things out of charity, but survival. And one of the things we're going to look at is how Prince Turki deliberately brought Islamic fundamentalists from the Wahhabi sect into the Saudi intelligence system in order to bond them as loyal to Saudi Arabia and neutralize their potential effect against the kingdom itself. But this also had the effect of, to a certain extent, deliberately focusing their ire abroad. Initially, the rage of the Wahhabis and the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamists who operated out of the Safari Club's networks was directed at the Soviet Union under the auspices of the MAK in Afghanistan. But after that, as we're going to see, and as a number of U.S. intelligence officers warned, even before the end of the Afghan war against the Soviets, their rage would turn against the United States and also Israel, and obviously we've seen in connection with September 11th how that took place. Again, that's part of the development of this fifth column. Returning again to Prelude to Terror by Joseph Trento, an excellent book. Adam worked closely with George Bush on the plan to provide covert banking services for CIA operations. Like most things the Saudis do, there were benefits for the royal family. The arrangement would give the Saudis a comprehensive knowledge of U.S. intelligence operations. In 1976, when the CIA needed an influx of cash for operations, Adam agreed to allow Nugan Bank's Bernie Houghton to open a branch in Saudi Arabia. On the surface, the GID was organized along the same lines as a miniature version of the CIA, but the hiring of case officers was very different. Part of Prince Turki's job was to reach out to mullahs to provide religious officers for the GID. Turki, perhaps the most savvy politician in the royal family, tried to recruit those who practiced the reform version of Islam favored by Ibn Abd al-Wahhab. From an intelligence viewpoint, bringing the extremist Wahhabis into the GID would make them loyal to the royal family and help ensure the survival of the state. In 1975, the royal family was approached by Pakistan's government for help in financing a pan-Islamic nuclear weapon. Adam and his advisors had simultaneously reached the conclusion that the royal family could not survive if they let the Israeli nuclear weapons program stand unchallenged. Parenthetically, before we continue, this is the nexus of the development of the AQ-Khan network. This is the Pakistani and Saudi-financed network that ultimately brought nuclear weapons not only to Pakistan but to a number of other countries as well. And one of the things that looms over our head now is the very strong possibility that ultimately some of that technology may find its way into the hands of Islamists either associated with Al-Qaeda or Al-Qaeda-ism, so to speak. Continuing. One of Adam's closest American advisors said, quote, "A decision was taken to pursue a two-track policy. Placate religious Muslims by starting a covert effort to develop a pan-Islamic military capability. The second policy would be to operate in conjunction with the United States on undermining extreme Islamic movements that might lead to the installation of an Islamic State. The Saudis were adamant, however, that the funding for the Pakistani program be for research only and that no bomb be tested." Next, we're going to take a look at the development of the BCCI and how that, according to Joseph Trento, grew out of the Safari Club. Adam understood that creating a single worldwide clandestine bank was not enough to assure the kind of resources necessary to stave off the coming Islamic revolutions that threatened Saudi Arabia and the entire region. The Safari Club needed a network of banks to finance its intelligence operations. With the official blessing of George Bush as the head of the CIA, Adam transformed a small Pakistani merchant bank the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, or BCCI, into a worldwide money laundering machine, buying banks around the world in order to create the biggest clandestine money network in history. Bush had an account with BCCI established at the time he was at the CIA. The account was set up at the Paris branch of the BCCI. Subsequent Senate and other investigations concluded that the CIA, beginning with the elder George Bush, had protected the bank while it took part in illicit activities. One source who investigated the bank and provided information about the Bush account in Paris was Jacques Bardu, who, as a French customs official, raided the BCCI Paris branch and discovered the account in the elder Bush's name. Time magazine reported that the bank had its own spies, hitmen, and enforcers. What no one reported at the time was that the bank was being used by the United States and Saudi Arabia as an intelligence front. There had never been anything like it. CIA financial wizard Paul Helliwell may have made the mold, but Adam and BCCI founder Sheikh Aga Hassan Abedi smashed it. They contrived with Bush and other intelligence heads a plan that seemed too good to be true. The bank would solicit the business of every major terrorist, rebel, and underground organization in the world. The invaluable intelligence thus gained would be discreetly distributed to friends of BCCI. According to Wilson and Crowley, Bush ordered Raymond Close, the CIA's top man in Saudi Arabia, to work closely with Adam. Adam had other important roles, too. He arranged through DCI Bush to put Egypt's Vice President Anwar Sadat on an intelligence payroll for the first time. This made Adam, in effect, Sadat's case officer. This relationship gave Adam leverage when the time came to persuade Sadat to sign the Camp David Accords. Adam and Abedi believed the United States needed monitoring. After Adam left the GID in 1977, he and Abedi, using Clark Clifford, began infiltrating the American banking system with surreptitious purchases of major regional banks. Because Adam, through his relationships with Shackley and Bush, had intimate knowledge of just how desperate U.S. intelligence was for the services of a convenient Washington, D.C.-based bank, acquiring one became one of his main goals. Meanwhile, as Clifford was making the connection between the CIA and Adam, he was also calling on Attorney General Edward Levy to kill the probe of the perjury investigation of DCI Richard Helms lying to the Senate about Chile that was threatening the future of Shackley and Helms, as well as the use of the Safari Club. Adam did not rely simply on money to carry out the plan. Adam and Abedi understood that they would also need muscle. They tapped into the CIA's stockpile of misfits and malcontents to help man a 1,500-strong group of assassins and enforcers. Time magazine called this group a black network. It combined intelligence with an effort to control a large portion of the world's economy. There is a vast array of information available on the Internet. Go to the Spitfire website, www.spitfirelist.com, and in addition to audio files available on Real Audio and MP3, there's the book Martin Bormann, Nazi in Exile, links to a website in the Midwest with the documents about the Bush family's involvement with Nazi industry, links to 2 websites by the heroic sister station WFMU that is archiving the entire For the Record series on Real Audio and now MP3. WFMU is podcasting the For the Record series. Each For the Record program is now turned into a long article-length written description. There's a listener who is turning the written descriptions into a blog sphere, a ton of information, a search function available on that site, and a page for listeners to click on in order to support the work that I'm doing. And if you don't like what you're hearing here, there's no better way of responding to that than to support the work that I'm doing. And many, many thanks to those of you who have done that. This concludes Side 1 of For the Record program number 522, The Safari Club, subtitled Fifth Column Part 6, being recorded on August 14th of the year 2005. My name's Dave Emery. Thanks for listening. Hello, my name's Dave Emery, and this is Side 2 of For the Record program number 522, titled The Safari Club, subtitled Fifth Column Part 6, being recorded on August 14th of the year 2005. We're going to jump right in with the text from a remarkable new book called Prelude to Terror by Joseph Trento, an excellent book about the intelligence community and one that gets a Dave Emory 5-star rating. Now, the major focal point of this broadcast is the Safari Club. That is a Saudi-based, privatized, outsourced intelligence network that in many ways subsumed the CIA while at the same time functioning as an outgrowth of the CIA. Privatization and outsourcing are two of the going words and going concepts these days. That has been true of intelligence, and in this case, the privatization/outsourcing of U.S. intelligence was directly reflective of and an outgrowth of some profound politico/economic relationships deriving from the petroleum industry, specifically the Bush family's involvement with that and the Saudis' involvement with that. Two of the key players in this were the elder George Bush and also Prince Turki, the chief of Saudi intelligence, the man who ran Osama bin Laden for decades, including the entire time when Osama bin Laden was working for the Western intelligence apparatus against the Soviets and afterward. Note that Prince Turki resigned his position as intelligence chief shortly before September 11th, a little less than 2 weeks before that. He is now Saudi ambassador to the United States, now headed up by the elder George Bush's son. So the Safari Network, very, very, very much on the scene today, or the residua of that. What we're going to take a look at now is how the Safari Network and the Afghan Mujahideen effort against the Soviets led directly to the formation of Al-Qaeda and how it facilitated Al-Qaeda's operations against the United States. Note that a number of officials within the U.S. intelligence apparatus had warned that we had been backing the wrong elements in Afghanistan, basically that we were backing elements that, although they hated the Soviets, hated us as much or more, and that they would turn on us. That, of course, has happened. Turning once again to Joseph Trento's Prelude to Terror. We read, "A year before the good folks at the CIA's Afghan desk popped open the champagne in celebration of the Soviet pullout, Osama bin Laden planned his move into the vacuum that would follow the end of the war. Bin Laden's goal was not just victory in Afghanistan, but a worldwide jihad against the West, a jihad that would engulf his home country and wash the entire region clean of the influence of the crusading infidels," unquote. The Saudi royal family continued to believe that throwing money at military and social problems would secure the family's future and access to the kingdom's petrodollars. But the Saudis' compromise with the Wahhabi mullahs had radicalized several generations of Saudis. The increasingly angry populace, deprived of any serious share of the oil wealth, watched helplessly as average annual incomes were cut in half from a high of $13,000 in 1981 to $6,000 by 2003. As with the last years of the Peacock Throne in Iran, the CIA, reliant on the Saudi GID and the Pakistani ISI for regional intelligence, did not warn the president of the danger ahead. When the Defense Intelligence Agency recommended that the Saudis needed to be monitored because they were funding terrorists, the DIA was told to discontinue all eavesdropping operations targeting the kingdom, according to the DIA official in charge of the program, who wishes to remain anonymous. Parenthetically, it is this Safari Club network and its operations with the Afghan Mujahideen that permitted the infiltration of some of these Wahhabi/Muslim Brotherhood/Al-Qaeda related elements into the United States. Note that later on this side, we're going to take a look at E-Systems in Dallas, Texas. That was the company that originally had the patents, or for a long time had the patents to Project HARP, and they trafficked some of the most secret CIA eavesdropping technology to the Saudis. And in many ways, I think we can see here something of a prelude to the development of P-Tech. P-Tech was a high-tech company funded basically by the Muslim Brotherhood, Yassin al-Qadi, elements associated with the Blind Sheikh in New York, elements associated with Bank al-Taqwa, and it was P-TECH that developed the threat assessment software architecture for both the FAA and the United States Air Force, as well as for other federal agencies, including the Department of Energy, which oversees nuclear power plants. And that, I think, in many ways needs to be explored in order to get a handle on some of the anomalous performance of air defense units on September 11th. Basically, when you have outgrowths of this Safari Club associated with the Muslim Brotherhood developing the threat assessment software architecture for the FAA and the Air Force, it shouldn't be too surprising when those agencies behave in an anomalous fashion on September 11th. Returning once again to Prelude to Terror by Joseph Trento. CIA officials were blind to the flaws of their Saudi benefactors. It had gotten so extreme that the CIA station chief, starting in the 1980s, actually protected the head of Saudi intelligence, Prince Turki, and the GID and the Interior Ministry from the FBI on criminal matters. The CIA insulated the kingdom from the United States' own law enforcement officials. When a shy and religious Osama bin Laden went to Kabul to, quote, help, unquote, it is not surprising that men like CIA officer Milton Bearden, quote, did not pay much attention to bin Laden, unquote. By giving him an intelligence portfolio with a GID operating in Pakistan and Afghanistan, the Saudis let a man in the tent who brilliantly exploited the opportunity by recruiting among the Wahhabis. As success came to bin Laden, the GID allowed him more and more scope, including recommendations for recruitment for the GID and Interior Ministry. Bin Laden was positioned to do enormous damage to the Saudi kingdom and to the United States. Because the CIA had effectively given up independent recruitment in the region, the United States was operating without a safety net, without the ability to detect someone like bin Laden commandeering the anti-Soviet cause. Quote, you were relying on two intelligence services, the Saudi GID and the Pakistani ISI, to act in the United States' best interest without any ability to verify their promises or their work, unquote, a high-level CIA official said. Quote, that is what the agency had become, simply a group of bureaucrats writing checks. We had no control over what was being done with the money, and we deliberately ignored danger signs, and there were plenty. Quote, to make matters worse, the official continued, the CIA permitted U.S. Customs at Dulles Airport to overlook an illegal export of our most secret eavesdropping software to Saudi Arabia, unquote. The software, referred to as Keyword Software, is a computer code developed for the National Security Agency by a company called E-Systems. The software allows keywords and phrases to be flagged by computers from targeted voice and other communications in real time. The problem with exporting the software is that any country getting it could use it to target U.S. interests and allies. It could even be used to track what U.S. law enforcement, military, and intelligence agencies were doing. Louis Sams, the man E-Systems ordered to deliver the software to the kingdom, said, quote, I was very nervous when I got to the airport. I knew it was illegal to take it out of the country, but I was given the name of a customs official at Dulles Airport and told if there were any problems to ask for him. E-Systems' desire to do business with the royal family was why I thought they sent me, unquote. Sam said that E-Systems, which had close ties to the White House, maintained the secret communications gear for Air Force One. As it turned out, E-Systems did not get the contract for Saudi intelligence, but the software was left with GID officials, even so, according to Sams. And again, I think we can see in this, interrupting here, something of a paradigm for the development ultimately of P-TECH, in which you had basically Al-Taqwa, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Al-Qaeda milieu, developing the threat assessment software for the Air Force and the FAA. Note here that the shipping of this keyword software from the NSA, courtesy of E-Systems to Saudi Arabia, would allow them to monitor what we were doing. Again, a key element of the fifth column that operated on September 11th and, in my opinion, is operating still. Continuing. What Joseph Trento goes on to talk about now is that when you privatize intelligence, it neutralizes the ability of counterintelligence, namely monitoring/spying on your allies in order to make sure they are not actually your enemies. Continuing. Among the problems with using a private intelligence network is that the benefits of counterintelligence are not available. And if your private network is essentially funded by another country, you are flouting a basic tenet of intelligence. Trust no one, including your allies. The purpose of counterintelligence is to test the veracity and honesty of sources and allies and to protect secrets. When an illegal network of private businesses and secret alliances carries out a nation's covert operations, counterintelligence is not possible. In the early 1990s, the cost of not having any counterintelligence capability would soar. The absence of counterintelligence became a growing problem as the United States relied more and more and more on proxy intelligence operations through other countries and private organizations. The lack of vetting of those involved in Iran, Contra, and Saddam's regime, and finally, in those who supplied the George W. Bush administration with false intelligence on Iraq, all demonstrate how devastating the lack of a counterintelligence capability can be. In the tumultuous times of 1988 and 1989, a handful of second-guessers and naysayers, unquote, at the CIA warned that the country had allied itself with the wrong people in Afghanistan, but they were not being listened to. The idea that our closest allies in Afghanistan would turn against us was not even given consideration. When Osama bin Laden attended events in Kabul in support of the Mujahideen, his presence raised no curiosity in the U.S. intelligence community. Reports on bin Laden were neither critical nor probing. The relationship between the new president and the bin Laden family was no secret at the CIA, and they cozily assumed Osama was on our side. For the CIA to miss the scale of the Saudi-funded Pakistani nuclear weapons program is an example of the woeful intelligence produced by the CIA during this period. But missing the transformation of Osama bin Laden from the shy son of one of the most prominent families in Saudi Arabia to the leader of a terrorist network supported by ISI and GID officials in Pakistan and Afghanistan was pure operational negligence. In many ways, bin Laden represented the penultimate compromise of the House of Saud. While half of the royal family recognized the need to do business with the West, the other half felt uncomfortable with the ways of the West. The initial intelligence failure took place in 1979 and 1980 when the CIA failed to see the connection between bin Laden and hundreds of his family's construction workers and heavy equipment operators moving into the Afghan war zone at the same time that the GID dispatched there the most charismatic Muslim leader of the time, Palestinian Muslim Brotherhood leader Abdallah Azzam. Azzam joined forces with bin Laden in opening a recruiting center, the Maktab al-Khidamat, or MAK, Services Office. Though this was all fully known to the CIA, the agency's regional experts asked no questions. Amazingly enough, no one in the CIA's Afghan operation even asked why a Palestinian leader had suddenly turned up in Afghanistan. CIA money was actually funneled to MAK since it was recruiting young Muslim men to come join the jihad in Afghanistan. This information comes from a former CIA officer who actually filed these reports. We can't identify him here because at the time of the writing of this book, he was back in Afghanistan as a private contractor. Azzam, a Palestinian by birth, had been forced years before to flee to Jordan and then to Saudi Arabia. In Peshawar, Azzam, funded by bin Laden and the GID, opened the Office of Services of the Holy Warriors, or Mujahideen. Azzam's message was clearly anti-Israeli and anti-American. And yet, bin Laden's opening MIK branch offices in the United States, Europe, and Asia was applauded by the CIA. The agency never suspected that bin Laden might have had bigger plans in Afghanistan. While bin Laden paid for the transportation of the new fighters to the war zone, the Saudi network of charities helped take care of their families. Bin Laden's army was one of 7 major Mujahideen armies supported by the CIA's $500 million a year program. After the victory over the Soviets, many of the Islamic warriors went home. They took with them the kind of confidence that can be gained only by helping to take out a greatly superior force. Bin Laden recognized that their experience and radicalism could change the face of the Islamic world. He kept the Mujahideen training camps in Afghanistan in operation and expanded his efforts by spreading the holy war to Somalia, Bosnia, Kosovo, the Philippines, and Chechnya. The network was spreading, And despite subsequent denials, there is incontrovertible evidence that the CIA's knowledge was far deeper than it has been willing to admit. An American consular officer in Saudi Arabia discovered firsthand that the CIA was allowing Afghan, quote, freedom fighters, unquote, to get visas to come to the United States during and after the Afghan war. Michael Springman, now a lawyer in Washington, D.C., was then an officer in the U.S. consulate in Jeddah. Springman repeatedly confronted his bosses about their approval of questionable visa applications. At first, Springman suspected that one of his bosses was corrupt and was selling visas to people who would never normally be admitted to the United States. Springman pushed so hard for answers that he was eventually warned to just do what he was told. Quote, "In Saudi Arabia, I was repeatedly ordered by high-level State Department officials to issue visas to unqualified applicants. I complained bitterly at the time. I returned to the U.S. I complained to the State Department here, to the General Accounting Office, to the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, and to the Inspector General's office. I was met with silence." As Springman kept pushing for an explanation, his fitness evaluation became more critical of him, and he was eventually dismissed. It took him years to find out that Jeddah was the center of the GID/CIA recruiting operation. Springman said he should have been suspicious even before he was first sent to Jeddah. Quote, "I had gotten some strange questions before I went out to Jeddah from the then Ambassador Walter Cutler, who kept talking about visa problems. He said how I should do my best to make sure that everything ran smoothly. Once I got there, I found I was being ordered to issue visas to people who really should not have gotten a visa. I'll give you just one example. There were two Pakistanis who wanted to go to an American trade show in the United States. They claimed they were going with a Commerce Department-sponsored trade mission. These guys couldn't name the trade show, and they couldn't name the city in which it was being held. When I refused the visa after a couple of minutes of questioning, I got an almost immediate call from a CIA case officer hidden in the commercial section of the consulate that I should reverse myself and grant these guys a visa. I told him no. Not long afterwards, he went to the chief of the consular section and got my decision reversed. This was exactly contrary to normal operating procedures. Essentially, in the State Department, the guy doing the interviewing has the first, last, and usually the only word regarding visa issuances. He can be reversed if it was not done according to regulation, for example. If somebody comes up with additional information that's material, you can push for a change in the petition. But this was one of a pattern. Week after week after week, and they got more brazen and blatant about it. And I was told on occasion, well, you know, if you want a job in the State Department in the future, you will change your mind. And other people would simply say, you can change your mind now, or wait until the Consul General reverses you. I learned later it was basically the CIA that had Osama bin Laden recruiting people for the Afghan war and taking them to the U.S. for terrorist training, unquote. In 1988, Abdullah Azzam and Osama bin Laden founded the secret organization later known as Al-Qaeda. One more time, because this sentence is critical. Note that this is 1988. That's before the end of the Afghan war and during the time that elements of our intelligence community outsourced and privatized to the CIA, to the Safari Network embracing the elder George Bush and Prince Turki. This is before that war ended, but already the storm clouds are gathering here. In 1988, Abdullah Azzam and Osama bin Laden founded the secret organization later known as Al-Qaeda. The purpose of the organization was to continue the jihad beyond the victory over the Soviets. Members swore a blood oath to do this. Quickly, however, Azzam began to complain that the movement was not ready to go outside of Afghanistan until it secured a homeland for the Palestinians. Bin Laden had already allied himself with Saeed Ramadan's branch of the Muslim Brotherhood and was looking at change far beyond Afghanistan. He essentially ignored the Palestinians. The arguments between bin Laden and Azzam ended in late 1989 when Azzam died in a car bombing. While some Afghan fighters believe that bin Laden and the Pakistani ISI were directly responsible for the car bomb that killed Azzam, Saudi intelligence sources concluded that Israeli intelligence had assassinated the Palestinian leader after being tipped off about his movements. However, they do suggest that bin Laden was the source of the information passed on to Mossad through the CIA in Kabul, in Afghanistan. So again, note this privatized intelligence network that ultimately led to the genesis of Al-Qaeda and that constituted, through these relationships themselves reflective of and growing out of profound political/economic relationships, this in many ways set the stage for the fifth column, which manifested itself in a deadly way on September 11th. But also note, as I've said in many broadcasts, that the events in and around September 11th are an extremely complex event and one not to be oversimplified. Many people have suggested that September 11th was a provocation. Looked at in many ways, that would appear to be the case. However, that is at best an oversimplification. Frankly, I don't think it's true. This is a much more complicated scenario and much worse. What I would suggest, first of all, in terms of getting a handle on this admittedly very, very complex event, is to examine the history not only of fascism but of fifth columns. I would compare what took place on September 11th with the subversion of France in the run-up to and during World War II. In, among other broadcasts, FTR 367 and 441, I compared the economic relationships between elements of the French power elite and their German counterparts, and how those economic relationships plus ideological affinities between the power elites of France and Germany, allied through economic and business relationships, were similar. They were afraid of democracy. They were afraid it would lead to communism. And the French power elite were in many ways far more afraid of elements of their own population, particularly Democrats with a small d, as well as socialists and Marxists. And in order to basically eliminate democracy in France, they collaborated with the invaders. In, again, for the record programs 367, I believe it's 367, it might be 366, but I believe it was 367. You can certainly check that out using the search function on the Spitfire website, but certainly in For the Record program 441, I accessed, among other works, some material from the book Triumph of Treason by Pierre Cot. Pierre Cot was the French Minister of Aviation under the Social Front, or the Popular Front of Léon Blum in the 1930s, and after the abortive fascist coup in France in 1938, he, among others, was taking stock of how the coup plotters did not abandon their efforts at eliminating French democracy. If you go to the description for the record program 441, there's a long excerpt from Triumph of Treason by Pierre Cot, describing in no uncertain terms how elements of the French power elite were fully aware that Germany was going to invade. They actively subverted the French military resistance to the German invasion because they saw that as the best way of getting rid of the Republic and eliminating democracy and bringing fascism to France. And of course, that is exactly what happened. Ultimately, genuine French patriots were put on trial by the Vichy fascist collaborationist government and charged with subverting France, whereas they were actually the true patriots who had defended France. The traitors took the patriots and put them on trial for treason against France. And even though, again, elements of the French power elite were fully aware of the impending German invasion, collaborated with it because they were much more concerned with maintaining their economic privilege and also their relationships with their fascist German counterparts, it should be noted that the invasion of France by Germany in World War II was not a provocation. The Wehrmacht, the Luftwaffe, the Kriegsmarine, and the Waffen-SS weren't French agents provocateurs. And it sure as bloody hell was not an act intended to promote French empire. I would suggest that the United States is in no size, shape, form, or manner the beneficiary of September 11th, although certain corporate interests are. The same was true in France. Many French corporations benefited handsomely from collaboration with the German war effort in World War II. But again, the German invasion of World War II wasn't a French provocation. Also, we should note in examining history that it is not unusual for allies to turn into deadly enemies. Perhaps the most striking recent example of that was the German-Soviet alliance in World War II. The pact between Hitler and Stalin ultimately led to the division of Poland between invading German and invading Soviet armies, but ultimately that pact dissolved into one of the bloodiest and most lethal conflicts of all time. And again, the Red Army and the Red Air Force and the Soviet Navy were not German agents provocateurs, and likewise, again, the Wehrmacht, Waffen-SS, Luftwaffe, and Kriegsmarine weren't Soviet agents provocateurs as well. The Eastern Front in World War II was not a provocation either by the Soviets or the Germans, and I would suggest that and the situation in France during World War II as analogies, albeit admittedly imperfect ones. Again, this is a complex event. In analyzing the fifth column that we're talking about here as well, do not overlook the material presented in, among other broadcasts, For the Records 498 and 499, because there are Underground Reich elements here in a big, big way. I would note that SECO, the Saudi investment company, the European-based holding company for the fabulously wealthy bin Laden family's European interests, was deeply involved first in the Afghan Mujahideen support effort and then in some of the Iran-Contra-related covert operations, including drug smuggling. One of the principal figures involved in those operations was Baudin Dunant, an influential lawyer who is not only a close friend of and a protege of, and also the attorney for the late Francois Genoux, a key Axis spy, an individual who, in among other programs, for the Record 453, is described in detail. Francois Genoux was one of the most important Third Reich operatives deeply involved with Middle Eastern interests, and also the heir to the literary works and last will and testament of Adolf Hitler, Martin Bormann, and Joseph Goebbels. And Baudin Dunant, a key operative in SECO and many of the operations of the Safari Club, one of many Underground Reich elements. Now, admittedly, the format that I'm using here on For the Record, at least most of the programs, the interviews aside, is a very, very pedantic format, consequently difficult for a lot of people to absorb. This effort here began more than a quarter of a century ago, and new media have evolved, principally the Internet. Please take advantage of the Internet, because those of you who only listen on the radio are missing an awful lot of the information. www.spitfirelist.com is a Spitfire website. Each For the Record show is turned into a long, written, article-length description, often containing text that I did not have time to include in the original broadcast. At the top of each description are numerous links, not only to other For the Record shows, but also to websites containing, among other things, the declassified government documents that demonstrate the Bush family's involvement with Nazi industry before, during, and after World War II. Tip of the hat to listeners in the Midwest for that. Websites containing both Adobe PDF and HTML versions of the pivotal Martin Bormann Nazi in Exile. There is a listener back east who's turning each For the Record show description into a blog spot, or basically a place on a blog spot. Links to two websites maintained by the heroic sister station WFMU-FM in Jersey City, New Jersey. More recent For the Record shows are available on streaming real audio and MP3 at www.wfmu.org/Dave Emery, one word DAVEEMORY. Older shows available at a longer URL for download only. WFMU is also podcasting the For the Record show as well. There's also a search function on the Spitfire website and a page to click on for information about how to support the work that I'm doing. And if you don't like what you're hearing on this program, there's no better thing you can do about it than support the work that I'm doing. And many, many thanks to those of you who have. I just don't have time to write individual thank you letters, okay? That concludes For the Record program number 522, Side 2. It's titled The Safari Club, subtitled Fifth Column, Part 6. It's being recorded on August 14th of the year 2005. My name's Dave Emery. Thanks for listening.